All right, hello and welcome to another episode of the Idealized Science Institute. I'm Jacob Beckey, and with me as always is Dr. Brian M. Wargo. How's it going, Wargo?
Very good. How are you?
Good. Still in Boulder for the time being. Getting ready to move, coming up to start a new position at the University of Illinois. But for now, happy to still be in Boulder and happy as always to discuss another article with you. So today we have a really good older article from Rosalind Driver, Paul Newton, and Jonathan Osborne entitled Establishing the Norms of Scientific Argumentation in the Classroom, or in Classrooms, sorry. And this is the main, just to give a brief overview, the main thesis that this article puts forth is that argument plays a central role in science itself. And so it should feature prominently in science education as well, both in education in science and in an education about science. And we'll talk a little bit about the differentiation there. But philosophically, this really is going to boil down to two schools of thought. One, social constructivism, and the other, a positivist view. We'll define all these terms, and with less jargon, really what they're saying is students should be active participants in the construction of knowledge through argumentation in the classroom, rather than being subjected to what they quote in the article is a rhetoric of conclusions, which is a teacher standing up at the front of the classroom and just listing result after result as students take down notes and then regurgitate it on a test. So this is a great article. You shared it with me. Can you tell me a little bit more about when you first read it and what was the context, and also if it stands the test of time now, because it was published in 1998. So let's maybe give a little context for the listeners.
All right. So I remember reading this, and this was probably 2002 when I read it, or 2001, and I was finishing my master's in X-ray crystallography, and my whole life was centered around 1.541 angstroms, and that was it. And the reason I bring this up is because scientists often work in a positivistic perspective. I didn't care about argumentation or anything like that. My biggest concern was getting rid of 1.544 angstroms on my diffractor, my diffractometer. And so when I read this, it was like really shocking to me. I just remember thinking, why are they talking about argumentation if we're talking about science? So this really was one of the very first educational pieces that I had read. And now that I look back on it, you're asking, does it stand the test of time? The answer is absolutely yes. Now, let me give one other piece of historical context. Because, and just so we know, Driver is going to pass away right after, a little bit before this article was written. And Osborne is still with us and still publishing, and he's a powerhouse. But this is also around the 90s, where we had the science wars, which we're going to be talking about this positivism. And positivism is something that most scientists were kind of just accepting, where this relativism that was sweeping through in the 90s, we called it the science wars, where there was a direct, sociologists were taking on science and saying, wait, you're not really objective and you don't really know truth. So it became a very contentious war. And so we need to balance how the authors here walk that fine line between being radical social constructivists, where a lot of the sociologists were. So I would say this was a radical paper when it came out.
Interesting. So I guess a follow-up question is just like, maybe, okay, with this context, maybe it's the right time to jump in, because I want to keep asking questions related to these terms, but maybe it would be more useful to start by defining them. And so maybe we just jump in, and if you wouldn't mind defining positivism, both just as a general philosophical term, but then also how it's used typically in reference to science education. And then maybe we can contrast that with social constructivism.
All right. Look, positivism starts 100, 150 years ago, but it works its way through. And essentially what we're talking about is, look, good science is making observations and going towards truth. right? If you observe things and you have data, there is a conclusion. That is what we end up going with. The term itself is a little bit odd. So it seems great. Of course, data should be everything that you're going to base everything on. And then you should have logic. The problem becomes, and the reason why positivism falls out of fashion pretty quickly, is because there are serious problems here. Like, let's just take biology, for instance, which is a major problem for positivism. What is a gene? Like, let's observe a gene. And they'd say, well, because you can't go under a microscope and look at a gene. And they're like, oh, no, but it's inferentially connected to, our genetics and DNA and things of that nature. But remember, we're not actually looking or observing these things. So that was the problem with positivism. And then you go towards constructivism, and we got to make sure that we're not thinking of radical constructivism, which we're still suffering with today, which is truth is no longer about data and observation. Truth is about how I perceive and how I interact with the world. So in many ways, they are on polar opposites of the spectrum. So I don't know if that gives a quick and,
So I think you mentioned a bit about radical constructivism, but maybe just in the classroom I can bring back to how they wrote about it in this paper, and I think really in the overview they do a great job of laying out what they're about to do, and the classic school science where there's just a teacher that is viewed as the person that has the knowledge and is going to transmit it. Right. This is the science is usually portrayed by them in a positive perspective, where data is interpreted and leads to a conclusion, and it sort of leads into the myth of the scientific method, which I do want to circle back to. But this is sort of what I would think of as classic school science, where there's not really dialogue going on, and it's just introducing students to cookie cutter experiments, or not even an experiment, but maybe a demonstration that leads to some conclusion that the teacher wants the student to reach. There's no questioning different models. There's no defending claims. There's really no dialogue. And so this is the positive perspective in the classroom anyway. And again, that term that they quote right out of the gate is a rhetoric of conclusions. And then in contrast to that, the social constructivism is dialogue, right? It's about a student makes a claim based on some evidence, they present that claim, and there's dialogue about these different, it could be as simple as a model, or it could be as big as a worldview. And I wanted to say, you said you read this in 2001, 2002, and that it was kind of shocking to you. And when I read it, I find it less shocking, and I think that that's just very clearly because, when I was going through your class, this is just what we did. We just had conversations about these things. And we, through quick quizzes, which we'll talk about, through long terms and everything else, we had dialogue all the time in the classroom, and I was always having to argue my point of view in these things. So it seems way less shocking to me, but I want to make sure that we're, giving good context for people that maybe haven't experienced it in the classroom, because it seems very obvious that this is the right thing to do. For me, and maybe for other people that have had the good fortune of having a class of this form, but we should try and go through it a little bit methodically and talk about how teachers can get started, so on and so forth. So hopefully, at least we're on good footing now with positivism and with social constructivism. And yes, I take your point about it isn't just whatever you feel or whatever you come up with and defend is then correct. The nice thing, and they talk about this, about the nature of science, is the final arbiter of all of our claims will be nature herself. And so social constructivism is kind of kept in check by nature, right? You can't just make any claim you want. At the end of the day, you have to go back and set it up at a lab, and you have to see what nature says. So yeah. But
think about this. Like, if I would have when I was going through my master's, had talked to the physicists back then and said, hey, we need to talk about argumentation, we need to talk about voice, and we need to talk about perspective, they would be like, no, you need to get your work and you need to get your data. Now, this is just something that a lot of scientists hadn't thought about, but every time that I was trying to convince them of something, we were engaged in argumentation. They were saying, no, I think you're doing it a way that's different than how I would have done it. And I'd say, that's exactly right. And we were looking at the same data, and I'd say, no, I want to take it in this direction. And we could do that because we weren't on things that were already concluded. We were like building new knowledge. So that primary piece of making new science, which is just science, was arguing. But it wasn't thought of that way. It's almost like they lacked the vocabulary. It's kind of like, I like to think of this as if you go to a movie or some new series, and they just start off the series, like a Yellowstone, I think, is a big one right now, and they don't give you the full backstory. They jump in, and right away you can tell that there's a lot of animosity with certain things. There's a lot of things that you agree upon. So whenever you just jump into an article like this, remember, it has this long history. So scientists have gone through this. And look, in the 90s, let me point out one other thing. The X-Files, it was a television show. It came out. And there was this perception of a serious push against science and its rationality. And so the X-Files would have an FBI detective and a scientist, I think the premise of the program was, and they would look at, like, I don't know, I'm trying to make these things up, Loch Ness Monster or aliens or whatever it was. And it was always pushing very hard back on science about how science can't know things very well. So if you were an educator in science during that time, you felt this attack. We also had other problems with creationists pushing against evolution. So from many different directions, there's this perceived attack on the objectivity of science in a way where they instantly pushed back, not recognizing that we were going to end up being in a better position if we understood and accepted that, no, our models changed at the time. And because we didn't seem to have that vocabulary to help us along, paradigm shifts and stuff that Kuhn would give us, it seemed like more of a war instead of like a dance where you could say, oh, now I get your point. That's a good point. So it's hard to go back if you didn't live it and really understand the feeling. There was really an animosity between two groups. So,
yeah, and I think I like what you said about lacking the vocabulary, because I really feel like that's a huge part of becoming an expert or becoming socialized into whatever group it might be. It is a lot about vocabulary, and so one of the things with the podcast that I hope we can help teachers with is giving them that vocabulary, whether it be to help them, when they're writing their lesson plans, or whether it be in the classroom actually implementing things. I feel like it's very empowering to start feeling like you're able to exactly define the pedagogy you're using, and using these terms, and you introduced us at the high school level to these, and there's no reason that teachers can't do that with their students. I think it's really empowering and exciting when I remember the term rhetoric of conclusions. I remember you using that term, and this would have been over 10 years ago, long before I knew that I would be going down this path of hopefully becoming an educator. But yeah, so to sort of jump into the article, something I wanted to say about one of the initial quotes that I really liked was they talk really early on about some of the shortcomings of the positivist view, it says they place an emphasis on that. The positivist view places an emphasis on factual recall with confirmatory experiments, denies the role of historical and social accounts of science, presenting science as a linear succession of successful discoveries, right? When we read textbooks, this is the impression you get, and it completely misses so much of the nature of science. And so one of the big takeaways from this article that I had was that argumentation is essential for an understanding of the nature of science. And they go even a step further to say, and I think they were quoting, I wish I had the quote here, they go even further to say that maybe even more, and here's the quote, most of what non-scientists need to know in order to make informed public judgments about science fall under the rubric of history, philosophy, and sociology of science, rather than the technical content of scientific subjects. Okay, so I think this is maybe one of the best quotes in this article, because, and they actually do have a lot of fantastic quotes, so that's actually saying something. But when we think about what are we trying to do at the high school level with science, right? The simple fact is not everyone wants to go into science, and yet we still want them to come away with important takeaways that can help them be better citizens and better whatever they choose to be. And I really think that the nature of science, and that is one of the aspects of idealized science, one of the sort of in the Venn diagram that we often show on our website and in various other places, nature of science is an essential component of idealized science. And it's something that's just missed in a lot of classrooms. And so maybe if you can just tell me a little bit more about how your view of, and maybe just from experience in the classroom, right? You've been teaching for 30 years now. What do you see as a transition? First off, how do you see it change in students, and how do you maybe quantify this change in an understanding of nature of science? And what is the role of argumentation there as you have seen it?
First of all, this article was the first time I had heard that term or seen it printed, nature of science. Now, look, we've had various initiatives beforehand, and we had a different term at the time. It was called science literacy, and we were so concerned about the general public understanding science enough to help them. Now, what we thought for a while, and this is more of a positivist view, is you got to know the answers, all right? Well, most people don't need to know that I was using copper radiation in X-rays of 1.541 angstroms, right? So the content really doesn't help you, but understanding how science progresses, its limitations, and where it comes about. So we've been struggling just to define what science literacy is. I'm happy that we're using this nature of science. You were talking about quotes, and I want to pick another quote here that I think talks about how they view the nature of science. Think about the dynamic in a classroom. First of all, if you're the teacher and you're talking about Newton, what are you going to say against Newton? Newton, essentially writes the good book of physics. All right, so it is here's Newton. This is what we're going to study. No Newton. But here's what they go around to say. And they're actually quoting Norris of 97. And they say, to ask other human beings to accept and memorize what the science teacher says without any concern for the meaning and justification of what is said, and to treat those human beings is to treat those human beings with disrespect. Oh my God. I remember I was floored the first time I read this. Wait, you're saying students in a classroom with education matter. We need to consider about their perspective. I mean, talk about radical. No one had written anything that I had read like this before. It was just like, look, we really need to think about human beings, or, and down at the bottom here, they actually say that, look, dialogue is a human construction. Knowledge is a human construction. It's not just this absorption. And then they start bringing in this idea of it is situated within a culture. So now I'm thinking, wait, students should be speaking about their ideas in class, and it matters what baggage they're carrying. It's situated in their culture, in this classroom. So, it's just page after page of these, like, it was one of those things that I think I had always been thinking about these things, but now someone wrote it down. Like, think about being in a classroom and they're just drilling and killing, and you're like, none of this really means anything to me. And now you have, two of the premier educators that I've gotten to know a little bit, Driver and Osborne. I don't know Newton as much, but even to this day, Osborne is still publishing wonderful material. And they're saying, no, you need to take these things into account. I'm telling you, if educators had to pick up one educational article, I would say pick this one up just to see the landscape, to start getting some of that vocabulary, to start understanding how different this was.
Yeah, I share your excitement about this. I was reading it. I read it, a while back. I think you may have sent this one as long back as when I was an undergrad. because I remember, seeing it and thinking that I had read some of it before, and then rereading it again. It's hard not to get, excited, because you just get the sense that that they are hitting the nail on the head, and that this really is how things should be conducted in the classroom. And maybe just to give a little bit more of an overview, because I don't think there's any way we're getting through all of this. But they start by defining argument, both in just sort of a philosophical sense and also contextualized in science. They talk about argumentation theory, and they pull from different literatures there. They talk about science and argument. They talk about argument in science education. And these are all kind of, at a first pass, you read it and it sounds like, okay, aren't they just saying the same thing? But really, there are these subtle differences, and then they talk about the role that argumentation can help play in developing conceptual understanding, developing investigative competence, and understanding the epistemology of science. And so maybe it'd be good to talk a little bit, because I think that the least obvious one there is the epistemology of science. And so I thought maybe it would be good to talk a little bit about what role argumentation plays in understanding the actual epistemology of science, how we know what we know. And I know that, I guess the quote that I really liked from this section, two, were, it is only through argument between competing theories about multiple interpretations of events that students can be brought face to face with evaluating how decisions between competing claims can be made. Okay? And then right after that, only by considering alternatives, by seeking to identify what is not, can one begin to achieve any certainty about what is. And that's Deanna Kuhn being cited there, 1992. Phenomenal quote. I remember
she's
in
a very
your
good
classroom.
researcher. She's a very good researcher on her own. We should review one of her papers too. They're very good. Keep going.
Definitely. No, definitely. And I always, it's funny in an article like this, I guess because I'm less familiar with the literature than you are, when I read the last name Kuhn, I sometimes think of Thomas Kuhn and thinking of Structure of Scientific Revolutions.
I'm impressed that you picked that up. I'm impressed because when I first went through, I said Kuhn and it said 92, and I was like, wait, and it's Deanna. It's not Thomas.
Yeah, but it is another Structure of Scientific Revolutions is another one we'll have to at least do a book review on at some point. But they talk about paradigm shifts in this paper, so I was thinking, anyway, the point being, when we're talking about how we know what we know, what they're pointing out here is that really isn't captured by school science, by the positive perspective, when we have just this illusion of the scientific method being followed through to some conclusions. You really don't get at the essence of how we know what we know. And so maybe if you could talk a little bit about how you weave in aspects of epistemology into your class, but also how we can use maybe things like the quick quizzes, from the Idealized Science Institute, to help teachers start to introduce some of these aspects into the classroom.
First, I got to give the quote that's going to set this up, okay? This is maybe the most bold thing that I've ever read. Observation and experiment are not the bedrock on which science is built, but rather they are the handmaidens to the rational activity of generating arguments in support of knowledge claims. I mean, think about what they're saying here. We've all been taught, like, from a positivist perspective, once you get your data and once you end up making your conclusions and they're perfectly logically sequenced, that is the answer. But now think about real science. That does not happen. You can be in the lab, you can do whatever you want, you can think that you've, quote, discovered something, you have this wonderful idea. It's not science until the community reviews it. And
Yep.
I mean, right there, think about when you get a paper published in science or some science journal, right? It could be science, but it's not science until it's peer reviewed. In other words, until you've made an argument, and by the way, it's going to be peer reviewed, and they're going to send things back and say, wait a second, we thought this, blah, blah, blah. And you're going to have to defend that claim, and you're going to have to say, no, in this context, here's the data, here's the theoretical model that I'm working with, right? So when you think about what science is, it is a social process. And a lot of people don't like to think that. They think it's a data process. No, it's a social process. And the verification of it comes from community. So it is not monologic, it's dialogic always. We're always, even when you're doing your own research, think about this. You're not just taking what you found from nature, you're talking to her and you're saying, wait, that data is problematic. That doesn't fit. What should I do now? And then you're thinking to yourself, it's almost like you're talking back and forth, hitting the ball back and forth over the net. Nature makes a move and then you make a move, and you're trying to do this dance to figure out what is actually there, and then you need others. But the point that I was making there is, even when we're alone, we are still dialogic in our thinking. In other words, to be scientific is to argue, and that is very different with some of the more dated models of, no, you just do your science, the results speak for themselves. No, they do not. And let me give it a good example for those that might not understand what we mean by this. Let's take an electrician, and you're a quantum guy, okay? So you two are in a bar and you're going to have conversations about electrons. You're not going to understand what the other one is saying. You're going to be like talking about this electron. By the way, what is an electron? Positivists would say, oh, we should know exactly what this is. Okay, great. Explain what an electron is. Now, to an electrician, they're going to say, look, these are the things that supposedly go through wire and make your lights light up and blah, blah, blah. And you're going to use the term electron in a very different way. You're going to be talking about probabilities and things. Think about the language. In other words, our understanding is inextricably linked to our language and the perspective that you come from. In other words, you might argue past each other. So, you have to, in order to do good science, you have to be able to have this. If you can't get a common vocabulary, you're not going to be able to really speak to one another. So you're going to end up trying your best to say, what do your terms mean and when? Because like you might say, well, the electron wave, and the electrician would say, wave? No, it's a thing, isn't it? And you're like, oh, well, this is from a different perspective. I'm using, this theoretical idea, and you're using this practical idea. So when you think about it, when we're really trying to do science, it's about arguing and listening to the other perspective and understanding what is their background, what is their culture, an electrician versus academia. You have to take all that into account, or none of it makes sense.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think all of this context is very helpful. I just want to push a little bit further on how. So this, what I think you just answered well is, how does argumentation, or you really demonstrated that argumentation is a fundamental aspect of science, right? We still, if you were to ask students and teachers, and they talk about this in this article, I was curious to ask you. I have some questions for you that we should get to soon. But so I'll save that. But I was curious about some updated data on this. But you really hit the nail on the head on how argumentation is really science, and how it gives this language to help us describe what is the scientific process, right? I hesitate to use the term method because that has its own baggage associated with it. But really, argumentation is much closer. Just that term in and of itself, when it's properly understood, is much closer to a definition of what is science, what do scientists do, than any prescriptive scientific method could be. But I still want to know exactly how argumentation plays a role in helping students understand how they know what they know in a classroom, and how you might use something like a quick quiz, or how you work it into long terms to help them develop an understanding of nature of science in a high school classroom.
Couple things. First of all, you can see why other scientists, formal scientists, might hate this idea, because what you're really getting to is you're trying to persuade people, right? Persuade them that my answer is correct. Isn't that what lawyers do? And nobody respects lawyers for their morality, right? Or truthfulness. So they try to distance themselves. We don't want to think about persuasion. Now, the article does a great job and says, okay, well, how do we eventually find out what we should go with? And they cite Toulmin and Toulmin's argumentation pattern. And it's making and backing claims, right? And that's the easiest way to do this in the classroom, Students don't need to know this rich background, but what they do know is, or can know is, look, if I make a claim, I should be able to back that up. And I shouldn't be using just, oh, do I like that person? Or they seem smart, should I accept them? No, you're still going to end up using that data, and then you're going to say, how are they using that data? And I'm always going to be a little bit skeptical. Are they going to warrant this? And so if I give a rebuttal to them, can they answer the questions and not try and bamboozle me? So in the classroom, I think this article is another time, it was the first time I had heard about Toulmin's argumentation pattern. And for those of you that don't know, it's one of the most heavily cited pieces of literature in academia, Toulmin's argumentation pattern. They use it for lawyers. They use it for any time you're trying to make a case. And they spell it out, right? They have a nice diagram. You know, this is, for those of you that aren't used to reading educational papers, this is actually a pretty short one. I can't find the tab pattern.
Yeah, it's page 296.
Here it is.
I believe.
Well, here, right at the bottom, they talk about data claims, warrants, backing, qualifiers, rebuttals, and so on.
Oh, I see it.
Yeah. But that was the first time that I had recognized it. And at first, you know what? I didn't like it. I remember reading it my first time, and I said, well, that's nice for someone who doesn't understand science, but, you know, why would you use this? Well, lo and behold, it turns out to be a really nice way. So, in other words, getting back to the nature of science and epistemology, how do we know what we know, and why should we have any confidence in those claims? Well, you've defended it from several different directions, and your claim is backed. You've warranted it. You've brought in your theoretical underpinnings, and it has withstood the scrutiny of others that might disagree with you. I mean, that's really the process of science. So, what is science and what do scientists do? You could say scientists argue, and not like on a baseball field or something to see who can end up breathing the heaviest or being the loudest. No, we're still using our data. We're using our theoretical underpinnings. We're using, and a question that we are now forced to ask, all right, how did you get that data? Because it is not acceptable to just say, here's my data. Well, where's that data from? Can I see how you got that? And it is that sense of questioning that all scientists do. Look, you know, when you get in far enough into a paper, let's say for your field, you probably don't need to read the beginning. You probably end up, and this is how you can really tell that you've arrived. You go right to the methods sections and you say, all right, how did they do this? That's what I want to know first and foremost. Okay, now I know how they're doing this. I already know what the pitfalls are of that particular technique, and that shows expertise. So argumentation allows all of this to be like this living, breathing, and also fun thing in the classroom where you can be more scientific by incorporating argumentation.
Absolutely, and I think that this Toulmin's model really, I think, actually provides backing to their claim that argumentation is more useful and sort of nature of science is more useful for non-scientists than the content itself. In a scientific setting, something that happened maybe over the last year that people probably saw headlines about, and you will see headlines about, I'm sure, in our lifetimes again, but it was this LK99 drama over a room temperature superconductor. And you saw a lot of these features play out in real time very quickly when someone presented data that they didn't adequately specify their methods, and they, presented these very bold claims without sufficient justification. There was just enough to make it look like it maybe was real. But the beauty of the process of science is immediately, because of the stakes of finding a room temperature superconductor, immediately experimental labs all over the world started trying to replicate the results. And within a few weeks, it became clear that, and theoreticians worked to do simulations and to see if this material could potentially have these properties that they claimed. And within weeks, they failed to replicate, and so it was sort of clear that it was not a honest article, and so on and so forth. And you see all these play out still in real science, but they can play out in the classroom as well. And I think if that's the only takeaway from this article, I think that's a pretty good one, is that these things can be implemented in the classroom, and not only can, but should be. And like you said, you're doing a direct disservice and disrespect to your students if you just invoke your stance as the teacher to make some claim. But you should let them play a role in this process. And I think, I've mentioned it a couple times, but we have all these quick quizzes on the Idealized Science YouTube page. And they're really, I think, a great gateway into argumentation, because I remember when you would implement them. First off, it sounds silly to say you get excited about a quiz, because we always associate with exams and quizzes, we always associate stress and anxiety, but there really weren't high stakes at all. And I think that's an essential component to the quick quizzes. You were really looking for participation and engagement and rewarding us for making claims and backing them, even if they were incorrect. I think that's an essential point to make for teachers that maybe haven't used these. But take a quick quiz off the YouTube channel, whatever you're teaching, just find one that is on that topic, and just try and implement it in such a way that you present them just like you do in the videos. And then you let the students make their claims and give them the chance to speak. Maybe they go to the board and they write something and they draw a picture. Yes. They start using diagrams and other ways of communicating ideas. These are all essential components of a scientist. And then you just let this dialogue develop. You have someone that believes that the ball has its max acceleration when it leaves the hand, and you have someone else that believes it's when it's at the peak of its flight, and you let them defend these claims, right? And provide their evidence. And then you see if you can reach a consensus. And then you go through it, and regardless of the outcome, who was right and who was wrong, you make sure everyone feels heard and make sure everyone feels encouraged to continue sharing their perspectives. And that's really, I think, a gateway. Quick quizzes are really a gateway into implementing this argumentation in the classroom.
Can I point out that Deanna Kuhn, along with many of the others, and I can go through the bibliography at the back here, the resources they put, and there's so many just quality papers. This was one of my first that I read, and after that I've basically read half of all the others that are cited here. But what we find is, teachers are not skilled at doing these things. Like, how do you get students to argue? Because it can get out of hand. So we don't want the argumentation like that you would see on a baseball field or something like that. So we have to teach them how to argue. And students don't know how to argue. They don't understand what should be persuasive. That person, they stood up straight and they were very confident. Well, that's not enough for scientific argumentation. So the quick quizzes are a wonderful way to help students and teachers get comfortable in how do we argue, without getting upset. You can still be invested, you can still have a lot of fun, and if you're wrong, it doesn't matter. It's just as fun. Oh, I really thought that. I can't believe this happened. But now, wait, what if you did this? And that is that type of generative thinking that these quick quizzes can have. So I think the point that with the Idealized Science Institute is, look, you don't have to understand all of this background research. You don't have, maybe you don't have time to read these articles. Just take one of these quizzes, look at it for yourself, modify it however you'd like. We even put the PDFs online, rewrite it however you'd like, and go in the next day and see if you can get your students to engage with these. And you can, one of the points that you mentioned is, will they eventually play devil's advocate? Will they actually take a stance that they are against to help the conversation go and to push everything further? Boy, if you get that, then you've arrived.
Right, and now having gone through a PhD in physics, it's just so clear that what you were doing in the classroom really did capture the essence of then what I went on to do in my research and in my interactions with other PhD students, as well as at University of Colorado, but also when I go to conferences and stuff. These exact things play out in those settings, and it is really cool to see it, or sort of to remember that this is something that I have internalized for so long because of how you handled things in the classroom. So I definitely really appreciate that. And
But can I point out that none of these things are going to show up on a state mandated test.
Right.
It's not going to help you with your AP. It's not going to help you in your college courses where they're just absolutely obsessed with just pure content. So you can see why a lot of teachers are like, wait. I don't want to deviate too much. My scores matter to the district, this, that, whatever.
Totally.
And so the idea is argumentation is a nice way. So even if you feel terribly constrained, you can start working towards this a little bit without altering everything that you're doing. So
Right.
instead of just giving out an answer, say, before I give this out, let's talk about what evidence we have for one way or the other. And
Right.
it might only be a minute, but if you do a minute of that, that's a minute more than you did before. So take everything that we're talking about here, and don't feel that you have to do everything. Just start your journey, and pretty soon you'll find out that your students are going to be more engaged. Towards the end of a long lesson of drill and kill, students will fade off. It's a great time to get them to be stimulated by thinking about these things. So these are not mutually exclusive. You don't have to do one or the other.
Totally.
See what's comfortable for you and start blending.
Right. I think that's a really important point that we need to keep reminding
Yeah.
educators that are listening is, it can feel daunting if you're constrained by administration or by anything else to implement some of these things. But like you said, just get started in some small way. And I think, as you start to work them in, you'll see that you actually can use these techniques and still hit the breadth that your district requires, so on and so forth. I think that my experience in your classroom, I think that I would have been about as well prepared for the AP Physics exam, despite the fact that you did not teach anything to do with the AP Physics exam. And we can maybe do a podcast at some point about the shortcomings of AP and sort of all of the educational research there. But what we have to acknowledge is that a lot of districts pride themselves on getting students to have AP, 5 out of 5 in the AP exam. They have transfer credits. Now, there's another huge problem with those not transferring and all these different things. But really, high school is the only time, because once you get to college, it is go. High school is the only time you have a chance to introduce your students to these things. It just really doesn't happen at the collegiate level. And so we encourage teachers to just do it in some small way. And I know we could continue going on and on about this article. It is a very, very good one, so thank you for sending it. I did want to just ask one question that I had written down, and this is just a selfish question because I will be teaching sort of undergraduate to upper undergraduate math in the coming years. And I just wanted to know, so there's so much educational research at the high school level and at the intro sequence level. But I was wondering, if you think that these techniques are as easily implementable at the upper level, and because you don't really see that. Like if you go to a graduate course in math or science, you really see a teacher up there, writing down notes in any setting I've been in anyway, and then the students are taking down notes, and then they stress out, and they take an exam, so on and so forth. So is this something that can be used at an upper level, or are there modifications that need to be made? And I just was curious about your input there. And this is really just, a question that I'm curious about.
And it's funny because we think of these things as being, a technique to use. But I think what we're really finding out, no, this is how we actually learn. We learn through arguing. And if we don't argue, we end up getting pigeonholed into, a way of thinking that often leads us to misconceptions. So
Right.
I would say this works all the time for everything. I think
Let me push back just a little bit, because
Okay.
the only reason I really am invested in this answer. A quick quiz on projectile motion, right, is easy to state. It's relatively easy to visualize. And the underlying theory needed is, in the scheme of things, fairly well defined, right? My qualm with this at the higher level is if I'm trying to think about how to develop quick quizzes for, let's say, very abstract math, right?
Such as give a very precise example?
Let's give an example of
Matrices. How about that?
Sure, linear algebra or something that involves, a new notation, a pretty deep understanding of visualization and analogs with 3D space and where those analogs fail, these sorts of things. Maybe it's just a lack of experience, but I struggle to see how when things get really complex and really hard to visualize, how you can engage students in argumentation in the same way. And so I view that as, for myself anyway, as a hindrance to actually implementing these sorts of techniques. I totally see how you can do it at the intro level, an intro calc sequence. But once you get into more advanced, say, abstract algebra or something, when things really are, the name, they really named, that well. It is abstract. It is hard to visualize. What's your take there? And maybe it's just, that's where the effort needs to be put in. But I just haven't seen materials at upper levels that hit these same sorts of things.
All right, so look, whatever algebra that you're working on, whatever math you're working on, linear algebra or whatever it might happen to be, you're going to end up working within a particular set of tools that you're using. And then at some point you realize the limitations of those tools, and then you bring in some new technique. Right there is where you should concentrate. How do you get the students to fall into that? In other words, maybe you have this idea, I want them to start going here, but wouldn't it be great if I could show them, look, this is an awful lot of work, but if I happen to rearrange it, boom, oh my gosh, if that could only work, and lo and behold, that's what you were going for anyhow. Now they feel like, oh, we discovered this, we found this out. Meanwhile, and you're going to have it on your quick quiz, and you'll have the hints and cues there, but to them it'll be brand new. They'll never see anything like that. So I absolutely think that, in a quiz that can point out the limitations of where does this mathematics get hard, you could say right here, and you could make it as, what would you, if you could get one tool or one thing that would help you go through here, and you already know what that is. Well, if I could have some way to translate this, that it would end up, giving me a really significantly great approximation or something like that. And then you say, well, what if I gave you this hint? And they say, oh, if I do this, and maybe it's exactly what they had just said. So I think that's one of the things that we'll need to work on with the quick quizzes. As you're going through these, hopefully you can start making these and say, look, this one worked. This was a great one.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a great point. I guess, and that's also just a more general, useful framework is like, and I think there are some great YouTubers that do this in their science communication, math communication, like 3 Blue 1 Brown comes to mind, where you watch his long form videos. Obviously the animations are incredible, but then also the best ones really do structure things in a way that it's guiding you to the discovery. And so I really like that point that even at the highest levels, I'm thinking of integration, right? When you're teaching, Calc 2 or something, and there's some trick that just, you do the substitution and suddenly it becomes incredibly simple. What
I would say on that one, like when you're learning how to integrate and you give them some representation of, here's a curve and I can make my rectangles and I've got these little extra pieces, I can maybe make them into triangles. I have a feeling there's gold in that one if they can realize, oh, if I make these smaller, look at how small that extra piece becomes.
Right.
There's gold in there. We just did a quick quiz after the Erdos book. I don't want to give it away, but I took one directly out of that book that we had reviewed. So hopefully that one will go over well.
Yeah.
But let's definitely work on these.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, no, that answered my question. So I really appreciate it. And, I enjoy our conversations, not only because I think that they might be useful to some teachers, but I certainly know they'll be useful to me as I, continue my journey towards hopefully being a professor. So I'm very grateful for you sharing your expertise with me, and I hope that the listener has found this somewhat useful. And if someone is listening and wants more information, we encourage them to check out www.idealizedscience.org. We also just set up and really initiated, thanks to our board members for getting our social media accounts set up and ready to be active. So we'll be releasing shorts of the podcast, quick quiz clips, infographics on science education and on the various problems we're hoping to address with the Institute. And so we just encourage you to subscribe. If you want to support our mission, we always welcome donations to support the podcast, teacher trainings, scholarships, all of these things. But at the very least, if you're interested, subscribe, share this podcast with educators in your life, and leave us a comment. We would love to receive questions from people that we could address in future episodes. So if anything was unclear, if you want more information, please let us know. But otherwise, Wargo, it's always a pleasure, and this one's been another really enjoyable conversation. So thanks for taking the time.
Very good. Always enjoy talking with you.
All right, I'll see you in the next one.